Okay, so welcome everyone. On behalf of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, I want to thank you all so much for being with us today. I am Maria Hernandez Ojeda, and I serve as Vice Chair at ALBA. So ALBA's mission is to preserve the legacy of the volunteers who fought fascism in Spain, as you know. And if you are joining our events for the first time, please be sure to check out our website for more information. Right now in the chat, Dennis will post links to our website, and also please be sure to sign up to receive our quarterly publication, The Volunteer. So ALBA is pleased to offer our programs free of charge, but of course, this is only possible through the generosity of our donors. Please do consider making a donation at the links, which you can also find in the chat. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for posting them too. Also, very important, this event will be recorded. So if you prefer not to be seen, please turn off your camera. There will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. So start thinking now about what questions you have, and we will invite you soon to write them in the chat. So today, ALBA is pleased to present Marion Nestle as our Susman Lecturer 2024. But before I introduce her, I would like us all to remember Bill Susman, a Lincoln vet and a co-founder of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, after whom this event is named. Just this year, his wife, Helene, passed away at the age of 103. She is fondly remembered by many friends here at ALBA. And we are honored to have with us today Bill and Helene Sussman's daughter, Sue. And we want to thank you, Sue, and the Sussman family for your support of ALBA. Thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce and also thank our special guest. Marion Nestle is Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health, emerita at New York University in the department that she chaired from 1988 through 2003. Nestle is a leading nutrition scholar and has written several award-winning books on food politics and nutrition. As a child, she attended Higley Hill in Vermont, a camp for left-wing youth, and she later donated primary source documents from the camp to NYU's Tamimen Library. Her father, Ted Zittel, was a labor publicist, most notably for the strike against the Brass Rail restaurant in New York City. We are very excited to explore the unique place that Marion occupied in her leftist youth, activist adolescence, and her work today in food justice. Over to you, Marion, for your presentation. Thank you.
Oops. Oh, here we go. First, we have to do the technical things. Thank everybody for your patience.
Yes, thank you for your patience,
While Maria was introducing me, I took a look at the names, and I have to say, I'm so touched to see all these old friends there, people I haven't seen in ages, and my daughter, and my partner, and a few other people that I know. And Jeanette, thank you so much for arranging all of this. It's just so, I wish we were all in person. I was very happy to be asked to do this. I don't get to talk about myself very much. I mostly talk about food issues. And this is kind of a different experience because, as you can see from this, I mostly write books about food politics, but my last book is a memoir, Slow Cooked: An Unexpected Life in Food Politics. And I'm going to talk about the unexpected part a lot. And I mostly write books about food politics. They're all across the top. The reason for the memoir was because I got caught in the pandemic like everybody else. I couldn't do the kind of research that I usually do because everything was locked up. And I thought this would be a really, really good time to address the questions that I get asked all the time about who I am, what I do, how I do it, how I feel about it, all of these questions that I'm really not very comfortable answering. And it kind of forced me to deal with it. And I thought at the end of it, it was kind of interesting because I could see that the book illustrated a bunch of themes that memoirs tend to illustrate, which is the importance of childhood and what happens to you as an adult. In my case, what happens to women in science and overcoming barriers to being a woman in science. And I think the value of persistence, I hung in there. And then of having values that I had as a child and then I've maintained throughout life. So that was the memoir. And the first question I got asked about it was, what's the difference between a memoir and a biography? And there's a big difference, as it turns out. And this was really drilled into me by the University of California Press editors. A biography is fact checked. It's, um, every single detail about dates and times and places. Whereas a memoir is what you remember and how you feel about what you remember. And my memory is no better than anybody else's. But as I said, I mostly write books about food politics. The book that probably is the most well-known of my books is Food Politics, came out in 2002, and then in subsequent editions in 2007 and 2013. And there, the first question I got asked about it was, what on earth does food have to do with politics? Well, it has a lot to do with politics. Food is about taste and culture and belief systems and identity and what family and culture you come from. But it's also very much about social status, wealth, and power. And these days, we have a prominent example of food politics in action because here we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has vowed to take on big food as part of his role in health and human services, something that amuses me beyond belief. And I have spent a great deal of time in the last week or so talking to reporters about what this might mean. I get quoted a lot by the press, and this is an article from the Washington Post just a few days ago. And I get quoted saying things like this. Now we have Republicans saying exactly what Mrs. Obama used to say, but the Republicans blocked her at every turn. And now we've got RFK Jr., who is going to be facing presumably the same kind of battles, or maybe not. We'll see. Anyway, that's food politics. Very easy to explain these days. It never occurred to me when I was growing up and a child that I would ever be characterized as the powerful foodie taking on food giants on the one hand, and one of the country's most hysterical anti-food industry advocates on the other. I mean, I just never would have believed that I would get caught up in that kind of on the one hand, on the other hand, and yet there I am. And the surprise to me started because I grew up in a very, very poor family. My parents were members of the Communist Party and were very much the kinds of family that were described by Mike Gold in his book, Jews Without Money. And I mention this in particular because Mike Gold's name was really Greenwich, and Higley Hill is Greenwich. And as I'll show, I was part of this family in a way. My birth announcement was drawn by Sid Hoff, who was a left-wing, if not communist, cartoonist at the time, famous for writing Danny and the Dinosaur, but also for producing a book of extremely funny left-wing cartoons called The Ruling Class under his other name, A. Redfield, Hoff being Field and him being Red and Field, and that was thing. The birth announcement is interesting for a couple of reasons. My name is misspelled. Um, and I'm with my father and not my mother, which is says something about it. Anyway, we won't get too psychological about all that, but it was pretty telling. The picture that got me speaking to you today was this one. I have very, very few pictures of myself as a baby, but this is one of them, and I'm holding a petition, Lift the Embargo Against the Spanish Republic. One of the great things about being at NYU is we have the Tamiment Library. And when I was doing research for the memoir, trying to look up things in the memoir, it took me about 5 minutes to locate the copy of the Daily Worker in which this picture appeared on some kind of mobilization day for Loyalist Spain. So these are my red diaper credentials. Here they are in writing. And that's what got me here. I understand that Jeanette Ferrari had seen something that I'd done about that and told Alba about it. Alba wrote about it, and I'm very happy to be doing this because I have a big association with the Tamiment Library. My father's scrapbook from the strike is there. And I have a lot to do with the food studies collection that's also part of the archives. I went to Higley Hill Camp in 1946, 48, and 1950. When I went to look at the Higley Hill papers in the Tamiment Library, I saw this picture and I thought, I think that's me right in the front playing with that goat. And that's Manny Greenwich, who was Michael's brother, who ran the camp with his wife. And lots of very interesting people went to that camp. There have been several reunions since. And at a couple of those reunions, there was a discussion about leaving the papers from Higley Hill to the Tamiment Library, which collects papers from commie camps. And the Higley Hill papers are there. And my photographs that my family took are there. And then lots of papers from other people who went. So I went to left-wing camps as a child. By the age of 12, my family moved a lot. And I had lived in Brooklyn, Northport on Long Island, Great Neck on Long Island, Manhattan. And then at the age of 12, we moved to Los Angeles, where my father had a job that didn't last very long. He died a year later. And in Los Angeles, I was a member of Hashomer Hatzair. I got very interested in Jewish causes. My plan at the time was to go to Israel and work on a kibbutz. That did not work out. And I went to Fairfax High School in Los Angeles, which at the time was 90% Jewish. And that turns out to be one of the more amusing anecdotes about the memoir, because in the memoir, I talked about how when I was a senior in high school and going and applying to colleges, we didn't have any money, and I only applied to 2 colleges, one of them Berkeley, and the other was Stanford. And I say in the memoir, Stanford, a private university, would be prohibitively expensive without a scholarship, but I took a chance. I applied along with 3 other people in my high school class. And then I said, perhaps by coincidence, Stanford accepted only one of us, of the 4 of us, and that was the one of us who was not Jewish. A coincidence, right? Well, after the memoir came out, somebody sent me this article. The memoir came out in September 2022, and in October, this article came out on CNN that Stanford had been apologizing for its limiting of Jewish student admissions during the 1950s. Stanford, it seemed, didn't want to be seen as having a quota against Jews. So instead, it just stopped taking students from two high schools in Los Angeles, Beverly Hills High, which must have had a lot of Jewish students too, and Fairfax. And they found a sharp drop in enrollments from the two schools in the class that started Stanford in the fall of 1953. That was just when I was applying to colleges. So that wasn't a coincidence. And that was sort of vindicated in that one. I went to Berkeley. And I went to Berkeley at a very, very interesting and exciting time. I was there in the 1950s when there was a lot of work on anti-racism and the movements and about Blacks and women and so forth. And I was in graduate school in the early 1960s during the free speech movement. I'm actually in this picture someplace, but way in the back. And the reason that I was way in the back is that because by the time the free speech movement came away, I already had two children and they were small, and there was no way in the world I could get arrested because I wouldn't have had anybody to take care of my kids at the time. So that was my education in why women can't be revolutionaries, or why it's so difficult for women to be revolutionaries. And I think this photograph is from about 1965, but in the early 1960s, I got caught up in the women's movement. I read The Second Sex, and even more important, I read The Feminist Mystique. It had an enormous impact on me. I was one of those women whose lives were changed by those books. And I went to graduate school. I went to graduate school at Berkeley in molecular biology because I was interested in science, got my degree in 1968. And in 1968, I moved with my then husband or husband to be, to the East Coast where he had a job. And I got a job at Brandeis. And I liked showing this picture because even though I was a scientist in graduate school, I was a postdoc for 3 years. I was seriously doing science for about 8 years. This is the only picture of me in a laboratory or doing anything even remotely scientific. So I like this one. In my last year at Brandeis, I got given a nutrition course to teach. The department that I was in, which was the Department of Biology at the time, had a rule that if you taught the same class 3 times in a row, that was it. You could only teach the same class 3 times in a row, and then you had to switch. And you had to switch to whatever the department needed, whether you knew anything about it or not. I had been teaching cell and molecular biology 3 times. And when the 3 times were up, the students were sitting in the chair's office saying, we want a human biology program. And they offered me physiology or nutrition. I picked nutrition. And I picked nutrition for some good reasons and some not good ones. I thought I didn't want to have to teach acid-base balance and kidney function. And I thought it would be much more fun to teach nutrition. I loved food. I loved to eat. I loved the way food related to absolutely everything that I could think of: history, science, philosophy, policy, health, everything. I just thought it would be enormous fun to teach, which it absolutely was. And I taught it in my first class at Brandeis. These were some of the materials that I used. I used the Department of Agriculture's Daily Food Guide. I used Frances Moore Lappé's first edition of Diet for a Small Planet, which had just come out. And I used a book that had been published by Center for Science in the Public Interest, which had just been formed, called Food for People, Not for Profit, a book that could have been written yesterday. The issues have not changed at all. Because I was a New York Review of Books reader, there were a couple of articles on the politics of food and oil that written by the historian Jeffrey Barclay, who was at Brandeis at the time. And I used those articles also as part of the texts in the class. So politics was in my interest in food right from the beginning. It's interesting to go back and look at that. I only taught nutrition at Brandeis for a year because my then husband got a job in San Francisco at the University of California's San Francisco, and I went along as a trailing spouse. I got a job with a really fancy title. I was associate dean for the human biology programs at the UCSF School of Medicine, but the human biology programs didn't really exist. And my job was to keep them from existing. And what I did do was to teach nutrition to medical students and learn what it was like to be the hazards or the travails of a trailing spouse. When that all came to an end, it came to an end very dramatically. But I did have some very interesting experiences during the years at Brandeis. For one thing, I was asked to be on public television, and I had my first television experience. And in the early 1980s, I was on a program called Over Easy on KQED. With the host Frank Blair, and later with the food writer Craig Claiborne, who I didn't quite appreciate at the time, but I certainly do now. And it was really a lot of fun to do those. I did, I think, 13 episodes, and a few of them have been archived and are still available. And I was able to take these screenshots off of them. I wish I had more of them, but these are the only ones that survived. And I also wrote a book. I wrote my first book in 1985, Nutrition in Clinical Practice, which is about what I was teaching medical students at the time. And in 2020, I was giving a talk on something biographical, and I went online to see if there were any copies of Nutrition in Clinical Practice available. And Amazon had one for $930.35. What is astounding about this is that that book is no longer there. Does that mean somebody paid that much for it? I couldn't believe it. Don't buy it for anything like that. It's out of date. The I went from when everything at UCSF fell apart, the only job I could get was a job in Washington in the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. And from 1986 to 1988, I was there editing what turned out to be the Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health. That book, Nutrition in Clinical Practice, turned out to be very, very useful training for producing the Surgeon General's report. It came out in the summer of 1988, and it was a very strange experience. The Surgeon General at the time was C. Everett Koop, who had agreed to speak at the press conference if he did not write his speech and if he could leave immediately and not have to answer questions. And so I wrote his speech. And this was an out-of-body experience. It was the strangest experience, hearing this man read words that, channeling my words. And my only regret was if I had known he wasn't going to change anything, I would have made it a much tougher speech. But there it was. And on that basis, I got the job at NYU, where I went in 1988. And I went to NYU, where I've lived happily ever after, as chair of the Department of Home Economics and Nutrition. Remember, I have a degree in molecular biology. I couldn't believe that a home economics department still existed, but there it was. I chaired that department and its subsequent iterations until 2003, and then retired from NYU officially in 2017. This was a very, very happy experience for me, in part because I was hired there as a full professor with tenure, and the story of how that happened I tell in the memoir. But to me, it was the most phenomenal stroke of luck. I went from being essentially a fired lecturer at UCSF to a full professor with tenure in 2 years, mainly because NYU was desperate to get somebody to chair this department and do something with it. And it was really a good experience because it gave me a platform, an academic platform from which to do a lot of things. And one of those things was to go to meetings. And in 1991, I went to a meeting of the National Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C., where they were talking about cigarettes and smoke and marketing of cigarettes primarily to children. There was a paper given on marketing to children, and I looked at all these cartoons of Joe Camel, and I could see really for the first time that marketing to children was something that really you shouldn't do. And I had never, I mean, I knew that cigarette companies marketed to children, but I never paid any attention to it. It was just so much a part of the landscape, these things that you just didn't even notice them. And I walked out of that meeting thinking, we should be doing for Coca-Cola what these people are doing for Joe Camel and various cigarettes. So I started paying attention. And while I was paying attention, my department was in the process of transforming from home economics to nutrition and food studies. We kind of invented the field of food studies at NYU. And right after the state approved the programs, Marion Burroughs wrote about it in the New York Times. We had a class right away. That was also a stroke of luck. And that program has been going strong ever since, so strong that the department produced a book this year. I wrote the foreword, called Practicing Food Studies, which is a kind of a 25-year summary of what that field is about and why we think food studies is such a good way to examine major social problems in social, economic, political problems in society, where everybody is looking at it from their own disciplinary and interdisciplinary perspective. But during those years, I started paying attention to food industry marketing and writing about it. I wrote articles about soft drink pouring rights in high schools and grammar schools. I wrote political histories of the food guide pyramid. I did a whole bunch of things like that. And in 2002, I put those together into the book that became Food Politics. And have been, and that was really a changing point. For one thing, I stepped down as chair at about that time. And for another, Food Politics did what I was hoping it would do, which was to improve the quality of my speaking invitations. So I got better invitations. To speak to more interesting and larger groups. And that was kind of what I was looking for at the time. And since 2002, because I wasn't chairing the department, I had time to do my own writing. And it turns out I like writing and I like producing books. And this is the output since 2002. And these sort of followed one after another for various reasons, covering different aspects. Some of them were done with other people. Some of them were done, by me. And there are also some edited volumes that I'm not showing here, but they came out too. NYU has requirements for faculty. And I was very lucky that the requirements for faculty were exactly what I wanted to do. You have to do research, that's the books. You have to teach, and I got to teach exactly what I was writing about: food policy and politics, books about the food movement, the Farm Bill, food systems, food ethics, food advocacy. I taught courses in all of those. And NYU, because it's a private university in the public service, also requires a certain amount of public service. And it turns out that everything that I wanted to do outside of the university counted as public service. Another great stroke of luck. So the public lectures like this one, that's public service. The media interviews that I do with reporters, that's public service. The editorials and op-eds that I write count as public service. I write a daily blog that I've been doing since 2007, public service. And then when I was hugely active on Twitter, that also counted. So I'll talk a little bit about the public service aspects, because that's how I do my advocacy. I'm not very much the kind of person who goes out on the streets and pickets um, and puts my body on the line. I mean, I got disabused of that idea when I had small children, and I've never gone back to it. This is one of the few examples. This was in 2011 during Occupy Wall Street, where I was asked by NYU students who were organizing Occupy the Food Supply to go down to Occupy Wall Street to Zuccotti Park and give a speech. And I did that. One of those strange speeches where you do it one sentence at a time and people repeated and repeated and repeated. A very odd experience. The mostly what I do is write. And I write articles that are essentially very well referenced editorials. I publish them in academic journals of one kind or another, public health journal, internal medicine journal, sometimes book chapters. Turn those out and, pretty regularly. And these days, and certainly this week and last week, I'm doing almost nothing but talking to reporters, 4 or 5 or 6 a day. And I'm getting quoted. So here's the Wall Street Journal. If the right wing wants to make America healthy again, this is a good thing, but how are they going to do it? My big question about that. So I get my opinion into these things. I did CNN this week about color additives in cereals. I happen to know a lot about colored additives in cereals. It was kind of fun to talk about that. I also did an interview with Fox News, but I don't know what happened to that. I haven't either. Maybe they never used any of it. I don't know. I write a daily blog, which I've been doing since 2007, and this was yesterday's post. So I get to post things like this. A lot of reporters read my blog. That's why they call. And if you want to read my blog, it gets delivered to your email once a day. You just go to foodpolitics.com and type your address in. I'll be happy to add you to the list. So this is the place where I really can say what I think about whatever the issues are that are currently going on. I get to rant, rave. I get to make lots and lots and lots of mistakes. And everybody points out what they are. And sometimes I can correct them, and sometimes I have to apologize, but it's kind of a great forum for that. I have 3 current book projects. The number 1 project is a new edition of What to Eat. What to Eat came out in 2006. Farrar Straus agreed to do another edition. It's an enormous book. I didn't even know they were publishing books like this anymore. But it's currently the new edition is currently in copy editing and should come out, I think, sometime at the end of 2025. The Farrar Straus has done a spin-off from that book. They're doing a series of books on oceans, and they took the 5 chapters on fish out of What to Eat Now and put them together as a separate book. It's about 100 pages. I just read the copy edit on it. I think it works as a separate book. I kind of like it, and I certainly like the cover. I think the cover is really pretty. The cover on all of them they're all different, and they're all really nice in the same blue and white tone. And then the third project is the reason why I know so much about color additives in cereals. It's a co-authored book with a friend of my colleague of mine on the United States food policy, politics, and culture, using cereal boxes as illustrations. So I've collected cereal boxes with sort of political or health things on them that seemed funny or ridiculous for years. And I've got a couple of hundred of them by now. And the NYU library turns out to have a collection of 300 cereal boxes. And I've met all these people who collect cereal boxes. You'd be amazed at the number of people who do that. And this book is so much fun because we get to start with the cereal box itself and then talk about whatever it is on the box that's really interesting. And this started with the one on the left after I did the Surgeon General's report, General Mills came out with a serial talking about the Surgeon General's report. I thought that was kind of amazing. And I like the gay pride one too. I think that's pretty neat. So that's the story from pretty much beginning to where we are now. I have this mantra, vote with your fork, even better, vote with your vote, if only. And I'll end here with this, showing a more recent picture, just to show you that I haven't changed at all. And the values are values and they stick with you for life. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share this with you. It was really fun to think about this, and I'm eager to talk to you now. I hope you'll have questions and comments. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marion. Really, really appreciate that. It was a great presentation. Hi, my name is Dennis Smini. I'm the executive assistant here at Alba. So the way we usually handle Q&A is that right now none of you can unmute yourself. If you have a question for Marion, as I see actually there's one right now. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. Type your question down in the chat. I will record it. And then I will message you and say I'm going to be asking your question next. I'll unmute you and you can ask Marion your question. In this instance, since we're just starting now, I think Leslie, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Leslie, if you'd like to ask your question now, you can unmute yourself. And then for everybody else, put your question in the chat and I'll call on you. You should be able to unmute and ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking the question yourself, I can just ask it reading from the chat box.
I've left you speechless.
Okay. So Marion, Leslie asks, can you elaborate on what in your childhood influenced your politics and advocacy? If you could think of a few examples of things.
My parents were members of the Communist Party, and I lived in Los Angeles during the McCarthy era. There we were, and so they had values, and one of the interesting things is we got into fights about those values pretty early on, because I thought the values made a lot of sense. I thought it was really important to help people who had less than you did. I thought it was really terrific to try to create equality of education and resources. I didn't think it was good for people not to have housing or not to have food. All of that made real sense to me. But there were other things that did not make sense. And this was during the period when Stalin was murdering Jewish doctors and other things like that were happening. And these things were discussed at home. And I think I was born a critic, or born a skeptic. And we used to have big arguments about that. But certainly my parents stayed in, my father died in 1950, but my mother stayed in the party until the Khrushchev revelations. But I never joined any of that. That it just didn't feel comfortable to me. I was part of I would say the new left at Berkeley, very much so. But because I had young kids, I was very limited in what I could do. I don't feel that that was a handicap. I was very happy with my kids, but it was not, I was doing other things. I'm not sure that answers your question. It was just there right from the beginning.
Thank you, Marion. I couldn't unmute before. I apologize. I was just curious in terms of, issues like Tikkun Olam and how, did your Jewish upbringing also, your secular Jewish upbringing, I'm assuming, also influence your advocacy?
It was really secular. My father was an atheist. Not only was he an atheist, but he was a passionate atheist. He thought that religion was the opiate of the people. He had refused to be bar mitzvahed. He was a born skeptic. He had refused to be bar mitzvahed, shocking his quite religious family. So I don't know. I mean, there were things about there were things about being Jewish that I liked a lot. I liked the values. I didn't like the otherness part of it. And that was obvious right from the beginning. The Hashomer thing didn't work out at all because of something that happened with some group that they just weren't going to have anything to do with. And that made no sense to me. So it was again a question of picking and choosing among the values, and saying, well, I'll go this far with it, but I won't go that far with it. I never belonged to a temple or did any of that. And yet I identify quite strongly as being Jewish, just not with a lot of the attitudes.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Marion. Okay, I think next, Dina Goodman. If you'd like to ask your question, you could do so now. You should be able to do so.
Great. Thanks, Marion. Looking at the waxing and waning of what you've seen over the years in food politics, how do you stay hopeful with the next generations to continue the movement, especially if they don't have political clout? A lot of them don't even have money to do so. My youngest son is actually working with Alice Waters in Berkeley and doing some interesting things with farmers in general and agriculture. But yeah, I just wonder how we carry this forward because, like everything in our world, and especially you're older than me and you've seen that generational change and how things come forward and go backwards. I'd like to hear some hope in the futures and what you see is on the horizons for the movement.
Well, I got to ask, one of the reporters this week asked, why did I think there was so much enthusiasm and excitement about Kennedy's interest in doing something about chronic disease and fixing the food system? And, as we were talking about it, what emerged from that conversation was the idea that he's taking on corporations. I think one big change is that younger people get the whole corporate thing in a way that previous generations did not do. And it used to be, I'm not teaching anymore, but 10 years ago when I was teaching, I could not use the word capitalism in class. It would make students enormous squirm with discomfort. And then 5 years ago, if I didn't use the word capitalism in class, somebody would call me on it. Aren't you talking about capitalism? So I think there's a getting of the politics now among younger people that makes me think maybe they'll figure it out in a way that the intermediate generations didn't do. There's certainly an enormous interest in food and in food issues. And as far as I could tell, that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. When we started food studies at NYU in 1996, there was one other sort of related program in gastronomy at Boston University. They're now 70. At least 70 in the United States. Every university has some kind of food program where they're teaching about food, they're teaching about food systems. Everybody's teaching about food systems. And if you're teaching about food systems, you're teaching about politics and you're teaching about capitalism because that's how it works. That's how it works. So I don't know. I mean, we're in kind of a dark era right now. It's very hard to know where it's going to go. And I'm not one who believes in hastening the dialectic. That's never been my particular approach to politics. But, how bad do things have to get before they get better? I don't know. We'll find out, I guess. But anyway, if you meet young people, you can't be anything but hopeful because they're terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. Okay, Leonard Lerman, I think you had a question sort of about what a lot of Alba is about family. So go ahead, now you can ask your question now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Can you?
Yes. I learned about the term red diaper baby when I was in college directing the Days of the Commune. A fellow red diaper baby identified that term for me. My parents were members of the Communist Party, and Marion, I think we're related because my great-great-grandfather was Avraham Zettel. you were born with the name Zattel, right?
Yeah, right.
Can
Well,
you
we'll have to explore that. Rebecca, if you're still here, you're the only one who knows these things. My daughter has a thing we can do. Let's try to figure out how to do this later.
Sure. I sent you my email address. I would really
Okay,
like to
great.
explore that because there's some radicals in that tree, and I think you're probably my fifth cousin.
Well, that would
Seriously,
be wonderful. I'd love to have another fifth cousin.
related to Leonard Iran, who was a great psychologist at Northwestern,
This isn't anything I've ever heard of, so I don't know. But let's deal with it later.
Thank you, Leonard. I have a question on from, I think this is from Martha Kransdorf. Please, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but Martha, you can go ahead and ask your question now.
Thank you. Marion, I wondered if you were at Fairfax High School when Frances Eisenberg was fired in the
Yes.
mid-50s.
Yes.
So her name rings a bell for you?
Oh, absolutely. She was my English teacher.
Ah, wonderful. I'm not surprised. Okay. She's gone now, as you might imagine, but I had a chance to interview her and it was a real privilege. So I'm glad to hear that you connected with her.
Well, if you have that interview, I would love to see it. She was a fabulous teacher. And it was, the people that I remember from that period who were fired, there were 2 or 3 faculty in Fairfax High School who were fired during that era.
That's right.
And our dentist appeared on the front pages of the Los Angeles newspapers. And it was a very terrifying time. What I was told at home was I was never to discuss it.
Understood.
Just
I would be honored to send you what I wrote about
Oh,
this.
I would really love to see that.
Okay, will do. I'll figure out how to get it to you.
I'm still in touch with several people from my high school.
Ah.
So if I can forward it to them, I would like to do that.
I'd be honored. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Martha. Okay, I think we can go to Magdalena Cole. You have a question? Should be on mute now.
Yeah, yes, I do. What can we do with little kids, elementary school, middle school? I work at a middle school, and the social class is very clear. White kids, what do they have for breakfast? They bring from home like a little container with fruit or like very nice. Hispanics and black, do you know what they eat? Takis for breakfast. And that makes me sick. And sometimes I get so angry and I grab it and I throw them to the garbage. And because this is so bad, I have a prediction. My grandma, that generation, and I'm old, died because there was no medical care. This generation is going to die because what they eat. I mean, it's unbelievable. When I go to supermarket here, I just die because I look so many aisles for what? For nothing. Just people making money. And it makes me super angry. I'm sorry. But I don't see the way this can be solved. And people is so disrespectful with food. Because I feel hungry. Okay, let's grab this or that. It's like not thinking. You need to think twice before you put something in your mouth.
Well, I wish you ran the food system. The issue of school food and what kids eat is a tough one. I've got chapters in my forthcoming book on it. So I wrote about that, and I don't like you're talking about those pouches. Yeah, I don't like the pouches either. But for parents, the pouches are enormously convenient. Sometimes it's nice to be able to just give your kids something like that and have them not bother you. But I'm with you on that. I think it's an enormous problem. I wish we could do a better job of school food. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Magdalena, and for that question. All right, here I have Naomi Sheeman. Naomi Sheeman. Sorry. Again, sorry if I messed that up. You should be able to unmute and ask your question now, which is also sort of about the food system.
Yes, thank you. And you pronounced it correctly. Thank you. I'm wondering about thinking about healthy eating and all of the problems around that, including corporate stuff and economics and culture and so on. And the ways in which so much of that discourse has gotten captured by the notion of obesity and focused on weight. And I'm thinking of a recent book by Kate Mann that takes on fat phobia and the problems with that. And now with Ozempic and the other drugs and so on. So I'm wondering if there's a way to separate what healthy eating is about and focus on the real problems, the corporate stuff that you focused on so much and so on, while pushing back against fat shaming and fat discrimination and so on. So how you see those different discourses relating, and if you have a take on this sort of obsession with overweight and obesity.
I don't think it's an obsession. I think it's real. Obesity is a risk factor for chronic disease. It doesn't mean that everyone who's overweight is going to get those diseases. But if you look at photographs of kids' classes, for example, now, and compare them to the kids' classes when my kids were young, there's an enormous difference in weight and there's an enormous difference in health. So I think it's real. I'm totally against stigmatizing. I think that we have a food environment that encourages people to overeat. There's tons of evidence that people eat more now than they did 20 or 30 years ago. Tons of evidence. And we need to look at the factors. And I think those factors have to do with food corporations selling more food, no matter what that food is. They were really good at it. They changed society. They made portion sizes bigger. They put food everywhere. They developed foods that have addictive properties. There's plenty of evidence for that too. And that's where the pushback has to be. But in the meantime, we're faced with an adult population in which 75% of American adults are overweight or obese. I think something has to be done about that. And I think Robert Kennedy's right. How do we prevent that? We prevent that by pushing back against corporations. I'm not sure he's going to be able to do that or not. It's going to be fun to watch. Anyway, that's how I see it. There's a reality here that where there's been a change in overall body weight that's not good for society, expensive for society, expensive for the people involved, and terrible for people who are being stigmatized. I completely agree with you on
that. Thank you. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, Marion, for that. Hillary Gardner, this may be, we're kind of coming up on time. This may be our last question. So Hillary Gardner, if you'd like to ask your question, you can do so now and take us home.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. I just had a question. You mentioned food coloring, and I know, for example, red dye in Europe is not allowed. And so I was wondering, with Alba being international aid and such, if you could touch quickly on that kind of international collaboration. Are we going to see more acceptance of European rules and regulations and vice versa? Or do you foresee more collaboration or less? Or I was just curious about that.
Depends on what they decide to do, or what they're able to do. Kennedy has said he wants the artificial colors out of cereals. Okay. The cereal companies are perfectly capable of doing that. They have pledged to do it and have not lived up to their pledges. He's absolutely right about that. And the reason for that is really easy to understand. When General Mills took the artificial colors out of Trix cereal, sales went down. They put the artificial colors back. It's just as simple as that. So unless there's pressure on the cereal companies, and I don't think it would be very hard, if there's somebody in government who oversees the Food and Drug Administration who thinks that artificial colors should be out of cereals, they'll take them out. The world will not come to an end.
Great. Thank you for that question, Hillary, and thank you, Marion. I could probably maybe we could squeeze one more in. Let me just see. Susan Englander, we got a question. I think that actually would be quite good to who actually may have left us when she put in that question. Okay, I'll just going to ask the question then. That way I can take us home. So Marion, this is Susan had posed this question in the chat. What are some of the best ways, in your brief opinion, what are some of the best ways and priorities we can all do here to like what would be eating well? I know there's a bad food system out there and bad food politics, and the corporations are trying to, do these things to us. But what can we do, for personal choice to sort of live a better, more healthy, nutritional life?
You eat real food. Michael Pollan can do it in 7 words. It's so simple. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. It's really that simple. Eat your veggies. Don't eat too much. It's really simple. And I find it very easy to live according to those principles. I eat junk food. I just don't eat too much of it. I try to make sure that there's vegetables and fruit in most meals, and I try not to overeat. It seems pretty easy to me. I really like food, but I like eating that kind of food, so that makes it easier. But you need to know how to cook, and a lot of people don't. So I'm not sure. And then the minute you're buying prepared food, you're leaving it to somebody else to do the cooking. And you've lost control of what that is. That's fun once in a while. But I think it's really easy. I mean, the basis of world cuisines is plant foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, meat and dairy, whenever you want them. I'm an omnivore. I eat everything, and I just don't worry about it very much. Eat a wide variety of real foods, and you're home free on that one. And enjoy what you eat. You can enjoy what you eat. One of life's greatest pleasures.
I will take that to heart. Thank you. I think maybe we'll do one more since that was so, as you said, short, sweet, to the point. Jeanette Ferrari, would you like to ask a question? You should be able to unmute yourself now if you'd like to.
Yeah, no, I just I think it's so great that you worked on the inside. So when you criticize these corporations, they don't have anything to come back as far as the facts are concerned. So they have to attack you personally. What you just said reminded me of Sidney Mintz having the corporation convince people that they don't have time to cook. It's very important that they feel that they get across the message to people that it's okay to buy this stuff because you don't have time to cook. Like it's a virtue. And I think that's all part of it. Don't you
There
think
was
so?
an enormous effort in the 1950s to convince women in particular that food was a chore. Just really awful work, and you don't want to do that. And we're going to make it so much easier for you. Remember TV dinners? They were fun, I have to say. They were fun, but I'm greatly for convenience. I think for a lot of people, cooking is really it's just more than they want to deal with. That if you're working 3 jobs and you've got a bunch of kids and you're dealing with all of that, I can understand why there are people who don't want to. And certainly there are plenty of ways of not having to cook if you don't want to. But if you do like it, it's kind of fun. You get to eat the products of it. It's fun. And I'm greatly for bringing home economics back to schools. It's where I learned to cook. I think, people who say they don't know how to cook is because their families didn't teach them and they didn't learn it in school. One more thing for schools to do. But that's where that work that Alice Waters does has had an enormous impact. And it's great she's done it. So, yeah, food is good.
I'm Mark Wallum. I'm the executive director at Alba. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements about our upcoming programs. On December 7th, hopefully you've been getting the notices about this. We have a live program at the first floor venue space at our office on 14th Street here in New York City. And that's featuring the grand tributes that we put together a film, a collage of those grand tributes. And then we'll also be hearing a live presentation from some of the grands. And we hope that people can come to that, check out the emails that we've been sending on that for tickets. They're just $40. And there's still a few tickets left, but act quickly because they are selling out. And we'd love to have all of you there so that we can get together. And that's kind of a holiday gathering too, end of year gathering. And we hope you'll be there. And then our next in our film series is December 18th at 4 p.m. Land and Freedom from 1995 will be the featured film. So please sign up for that. And we hope to see you there. That's an online event. Okay. So I want to end by, again, it was an honor to have Sue Sussman and to have Rebecca Sussman here and members of the Sussman family. Thank you for being at our annual Sussman Lecture. Thank you, of course, to my colleague Dennis for so ably taking care of the tech as always. Thank you to Maria for her introduction, and great thank you to all of you for being here. And one last thank you and round of applause, virtual applause for our guest, Marion Nestle. Thank you, Marion, for being our guest today at the Sussman. Thank you all. Okay, take care, and we'll see you at the next event.